Good day, everybody. The Geopolitical Institute Flanders and Netherlands has started quite recently within its own YouTube channel. Today we're going to have an interview in English because today we interview Marwa Osman. Marwa Osman is a freelance journalist and a professor at university. Today she speaks about the current political situation in our country. There has been a lot of political tensions in the region, especially the last few months. She will explain a little bit about the history of these political tensions, and afterwards about the explosion in the harbor of Beirut that we all saw a few weeks ago.
I want to thank you for having me on your channel, and I hope you're all doing well because the situation in Lebanon does not indicate anything near well so far after the devastating explosion that happened in August 4. But the current political situation is a bit complicated, and people need to understand how the political fabric in Lebanon works in order to understand why it's very complicated at the moment. We are a democratic country. We have democratic elections. We have a parliament. We have a president and a speaker. And supposedly due to sectarian issues, even the prime minister is maybe picked, if you will, as a consensus rather than elections in Lebanon. To understand how this political fabric is made to be in Lebanon, you need to understand what happened before 1975 up until today. Even you want to go back as far as the 18th century to know what Lebanon is to begin with, because a few people would actually name it as a state. We cannot say that Lebanon is a state to begin with. But starting from the 1860s, when the first in the modern history of Lebanon, the first civil war that happened, upcoming to the 1975, the final civil war of the postmodern history in Lebanon, we see that the fabrics, the political elite in this small swath of land known as Lebanon have been the same people, the same families, the same tribes who have governed this piece of land with the help of foreign intervention, direct foreign intervention, whether from France, we were a part of the French mandate, whether from Britain before the French, whether from Turkey, we were ruled by Turkey for 400 years. Just fast forward to 1943 when we supposedly were independent, but the issue is in 1943 we did not gain independence. What happened is that the colonial powers of the world just divided the region and they cut us from the Great Levant, which is known as Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon, and also part of Iraq as well. So the Great Levant was broken, divided, hence the birth of Lebanon. But since then, it has been nonstop, hectic wars, civil wars, foreign wars, and very heavy and static internal political havoc. 1975 till 1991, it's the Lebanese 15 years of Lebanese civil war that everyone was involved in, and the civil war in Lebanon is usually up until that point is a sectarian war. Starting from 1991, when the Ta'if Accord was signed, and despite the fact that Ta'if in Arabic means sect, it was not named after the sect. It was actually named after the area in Saudi Arabia where the agreement was brokered in the Ta'if region. So the Ta'if Accord, which wrote on the table all the sects in Lebanon that were fighting for almost 15 years, added to that people on the table who were not fighting other Lebanese, who were fighting actually our southern enemy, which is the Israeli regime who invaded Beirut in 1982. So basically, when we're talking about the group of people that came together in the Ta'if Accord, which was signed in a region in Saudi Arabia, all the people on that table, which were part of the civil war in Lebanon for 15 years from 1975 to 1991, they came together and decided finally it's about time to stop the bloodshed after more than 500,000 Lebanese people were injured, more than 150,000 killed. It was a devastation, obviously, in a small country like Lebanon, which is still not valid to be named a country since it was part of 2 or 3 countries to begin with. Later on, when Lebanon was supposedly peaceful, which means security-wise it was better than the years before in the 80s, the 90s were pretty much of a very important step for Lebanon to create some sort of an economy to build upon the state and to fix the institutions of the government. Sadly, this did not happen. What happened is the people who were part of the Ta'if Accord, and I'm talking about then Rafiq al-Hariri, the late Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri, the president at that time, Hirawi, Ilyas Hirawi, and the speaker after the first Lebanese election that happened after the war, which was in 1992, the speaker was also Nabih Berri. Oddly, the speaker is still up to this point the same person, Nabih Berri. But since those three came together, they decided to build a customized economy for Lebanon based on taking loans from the World Bank, from big countries, capitalist countries in the world with huge interest rates, and it accumulated from 2 billion to 12 billion to 90 billion dollars at the end of 2019. Why am I saying all of this? Because people need to know what happened at the so-called protests of October 17, 2019, when all of this broke out and the economic crisis came up to the up front in Lebanon. It happened because of more than 30 years of a system of a capitalist system of banking based on a scheme well put by people in the central bank in Lebanon that would base their profit on the people's money by taking the money from the people who deposit their money in the bank, giving them as loans to the government while making huge interest rates in profit. At the same time, the government that took the loans from the central bank ended up stealing it because of the political elite that are in this in the government institutions, which added up to the people's money in the banks evaporating, literally evaporating. If you have now a bank note, or if you have a small bank account, the only thing that you have is a number in your account. There are no money to cover the numbers in your account. The people who are now on pension, their money just evaporated. This was happening throughout 30 years, but it began to be shown to the public late 2018, and it exploded in October 17, 2019, when the protests began because of something so people think that it's so silly, but it's not. It was a new tax to be put out by the government for the people to pay, and it's a tax on WhatsApp, a WhatsApp application, which is, by the way, illegal to put taxes on such applications. But believe it or not, this was the stone that just broke everything in the hearts and minds of the Lebanese and made them protest in 2019, October 2019. But basically what brought us here, what the system of banking, that the banking system, the financial system in Lebanon that broke every rule in the book of finances without an economy that is built on agriculture or industry. We had nothing except money, banks, and a very much consumer oriented markets in Lebanon. We just jumped to buy everything. 90% of the products in my country are imported, which explains why the economy just broke the way it did. But all of this was not possible without the proper foreign backing. What I mean by foreign backing is foreign backing for these financial institutions in Lebanon. For example, when all this disaster happened, especially the biggest scheme in history, I think we're going down in the Guinness Book of Record because of this scheme made by the likes of the governor of the central bank, Riyad Salemi, and a number of people who work at the Société of the Banks in Lebanon, which is an association that usually manages all the banks in Lebanon. And we have a huge number of banks, by the way, relative to the population and the size of the country. So all of these people were, their work, their dirty work was being facilitated by huge financial institutions across the world, mainly the US Treasury and the US Federal Reserve, which brings us to the fact when the people tried to bring those to justice, it was none other than the US ambassador in Lebanon that stood against this and said that literally said, you can find it on articles online, when Ambassador Shia said that Dorothy Shia that Riyad Salemi is a red line, and the U.S. will not allow anyone to hold him responsible or to do anything for that matter with him. So these are the same people who facilitated these schemes and now protecting the people behind these schemes. Add to that, we have a security issue. We had security issues from 2011 till 2016 with Daesh. We had ISIS in Lebanon, dormant cells. We had a lot of terrorist attacks in Lebanon. Now, thankfully, we got rid of Daesh due to the heroic efforts of the resistance, along with the Lebanese army and the Syrian Arab army as well at the border, especially the one in Arsal. It's been we're now celebrating the second anniversary of the second liberation in Lebanon. The first liberation being the liberation of South Lebanon from the Israeli occupation. The second one is liberating the Bekaa region, which is the western part of Lebanon on the border with Syria from Daesh. That's the second liberation for us. So we had also these insecurities happening between 2011 and 2016. Add to that the constant aggression as well from the Israeli regime against Lebanon, constant airspace violations, constant land and sea violations, and obviously the war in Syria had a very, very bad effect on the Lebanese economy. The influx of more than 1.7 million refugees into Lebanon. We still have them here registered for at the UN only, I think 800,000 or 900,000 at most, but it's 1.7 million refugees, and we are a population of 4 million. You can imagine the situation. The issue about Lebanon right now, especially after the disaster of the coronavirus, added to that with the lockdown that happened just after the collapse of the economy. So you have a collapse of the economy because of corrupt people, and then you have the coronavirus pandemic, which led to lockdowns, which also devastated the businesses in Lebanon. Just it shattered the tourism sector, which Lebanon very much leans on. And then you had the catastrophic explosion that happened on August 4th. That was like nothing we have ever seen. I mean, I came to Lebanon 1996. I actually resided fully in Lebanon when I became a student at the university in the year 2006. But before that, I was in Lebanon in the 1996 aggression, Wrath of Grapes, the Israeli aggression. I also witnessed the 2006 devastating 33 war on Lebanon. The explosion that happened on August 4th was nothing, absolutely nothing like it. It was something that I would never even wish upon my enemy. Was that grave. It's something that we still live through every day. Every one of us has PTSD. Every one of us has either lost a loved one, or a loved one is injured, or their house is shattered. More than 300,000 humans have lost shelter in Lebanon. Hopefully, they do have on other places, because we Lebanese, we all originate from places outside the capital. So we have other homes, just like myself. I was telling you before we started the show that I just arrived to my village house. I also have one in the city. This is the case of all Lebanese people. So thankfully, they have other places to reside to, because it's a catastrophe, and it's nothing that you can just see. You have to be there to understand what I'm saying. And mind you, that this area that was hit, which is the area of the port of Beirut, is it has a radius of at least 5 to 10 kilometers, between 5 to 10 kilometers. Let's just take the average and say 7 kilometers of businesses, companies, associations. So just think about how many people lost their jobs at that second as well. So that devastation brought about unprecedented help, if you will, from all countries across the world, which is I'm very thankful for it, obviously, especially at times like this. But it also brought about a lot of question marks as to what do these countries really want from helping Lebanon, or what would they desire Lebanon do in return for such help. And I'm specifically talking about people who introduced themselves as the only salvation for Lebanon. For example, like President Emmanuel Macron of France, who came twice in 1 month to Lebanon, and supposedly he's going to be coming at the beginning of October as well. So this puts a lot of question marks to this small, tiny little country as to where the politics is taking the country. Added to that, the economy and the foreign intervention that we simply don't know where will end up. Now, the second question is about, remind me.
It was about the harbor explosion, so that's what we are talking about now, and the other one is about the peace treaty with Israel.
Okay. Now, what happened on August 4 had a lot of question marks as to how it happened and why it happened at this point in time. The how it happened was fast for us to know, because there was thousands of tons of ammonium nitrate, which was equated to 1,800 tons of TNT. It was that it was that mind blowing. So we knew that this shipment docked in Beirut 6 years ago. We then knew further on that the owner of this shipment was actually in a country in Africa, and that a country of origin for this shipment is in Georgia. So someone in Africa ordered a shipment of ammonium nitrate from Eastern Europe, and it was supposed to arrive to Africa. It never arrived. The people who ordered it never paid for it because it never arrived, and it ended up docking in Beirut 6 years ago. The questions that need to be answered, which is now it's more than a month. It's actually a bit of 40 days now since the explosion. No one has told us who made the decision to let this ship dock in the port of Beirut, who took the decision for this shipment to be stored in Beirut, despite the fact that it's a residential area. I know it should not be a residential area, but corruption is so vast in Lebanon that right around the airport and the port, it's a residential area. No other country on the world has this. And add to that we don't know, after taking the decision to store this shipment in the port 12 of Beirut port, who made the decision to stay silent about such a sleeping disaster in the port? Never mind if this was sabotage or not. I'm not talking about any conspiracy theories here, despite the fact that everything is on the table. We have an enemy that could take advantage of anything in Lebanon. And if they don't, they would be idiots. And I know that they're not idiots. But I'm talking about all this line of decision-making process that ended up to keep this shipment for 6 years in the port of Beirut without anyone doing anything about it. More than 3 prime ministers passed throughout the 6 years, which means more than 3 ministers of transportation, which are supposedly responsible for shipments in the port of Beirut, also passed throughout these 6 years, and no one did anything. And other than that, the people who are responsible of the port issued a lot of questioning to courts in Lebanon, asking them to do something about it throughout the 6 years, asking judges, please just put out an order to say that we need to evacuate this shipment. 6 judges that did nothing. They just put the files in the drawers for some reason, which ended up with this disaster. Again, I'm not saying this might not be a sabotage. I'm not talking about how this was caused. I'm talking about who made the decisions for this shipment to stay where it is, for other people to make their move and take advantage of it. 1, maybe it happened, maybe it not. 2, for such hazardous substances to be near residential areas where anything can happen, and obviously it did. Ended up in a devastation. The strongest non-nuclear explosion in history happened in Beirut that day. So with that being said, it just puts on the table out loud and clear the cases of corruption. It's not about just the elite. It's also institutional corruption in Lebanon. And why is there institutional corruption? Because everyone who is employed in the government institutions is employed according to their sect. Everything is divided according to sect in Lebanon. It's not according to your CV or your experience or whether you're good or not, or whether you do an exam to get hired or not. It's according to who you belong to, Are you a Maronite? Are you a Shia? Are you a Sunni? Are you an Orthodox? Who do you belong to? We have a paper. We just put positions on a piece of paper, divide them, and give them out. For example, as a Lebanese, I'm not allowed to become president of Lebanon. I'm not even allowed to run elections as a president for Lebanon. Why? Because I'm a Muslim. Add to that a Muslim Shia. It's that hard because you have to be a Maronite. There's no law that states that, but it's a tradition. You have to be a Maronite in Lebanon to become a president. You have to be a Shia to become a public speaker, a speaker in parliament, and you have to be a Sunni in order to become a prime minister. And just imagine how that works at the level of the institutions, at the level of the army, the head of the army, the chief of the army, we say like the biggest ranking commander, lieutenant general, if you will, of the army is supposed to be a Maronite. He's not allowed to be anything other, not even an Orthodox. He's a Christian too, but no, he has to be a Maronite. This is the mentality that runs and governs Lebanon, which has brought us to this devastation and this part of pressure against the Lebanese people that we cannot endure anymore. But at the same time, we have a lot of foreign intervention for foreign if you will, potential in gaining certain economic or political advancements in Lebanon. For example, now the French are saying that they want to rent the port of Beirut, which is a public. It's a public institution. It's owned by. It's run by the government. It's owned by the people. Now France wants to rent the port. Next is being said that another European country wants to rent the airport. The third thing that we will hear that some other country, maybe not a European one, wants to take control of the borderline between Lebanon and Syria and wants to control the borderline between Lebanon and occupied Palestine. This is the level of fear that we live in on a daily basis, that now anything is possible, anyone can intervene, and literally at any point, anything can spark either, you can call it a mini civil war. We have seen that in the past couple of weeks, a mini civil war in the streets of Beirut, a mini civil war in the streets of Tripoli. We had 4 Lebanese army soldiers martyred last week. Why? Because a dormant Daesh ISIS cell decided to reappear in Tripoli in the northern part of the country. It's political and security havoc in the country to a point that you cannot handle everything at the same time. You have your economy, you have your coronavirus pandemic, you have your corruption, you have your explosion, and all of this added to that, traffic, pollution. We don't know if the schools are going to reopen or not. It's literally, it's like a sci-fi movie, but it's reality in Lebanon. So basically, that's the brief, if you will, about the country.
Thank you very much. The last question about the peace treaty between Israel and the Arab Emirates.
It was not a surprise. Actually, it was anticipated. And I'm talking here about the peace agreement signed between the United Arab Emirates and the Israeli regime, and also Bahrain and the Israeli regime. Actually, I was anticipating Bahrain to do it before the UAE, since they hosted the Deal of the Century conference last year, if you remember that, when Jared Kushner was presenting to us Arabs who don't know how to govern themselves, how we should govern ourselves and be friends with the Israelis while not giving any rights for the Palestinians. He failed, obviously, in that, which led to the fast agreements being signed between the regimes in the Persian Gulf Arab states with the Israeli regime. Despite the fact that this agreement is not a surprise for all Arabs, not just for me, it was a surprise to see the number of activists in the UAE in specific that stood against this deal, because it represented nothing for the Palestinians. The Palestinians were not even mentioned in the deal, by the way. You could get the text, read it, nothing for the Palestinians there. Nothing about the right of return, nothing about the violation of human rights, nothing about the blockade of Gaza, nothing about the constant carpet bombing of Gaza, nothing about the annexation of more Palestinian land in the West Bank, the apartheid wall erected in Al-Quds, Jerusalem. Sometimes it passes through the same house. So nothing about all of that. But if you ask me what will this peace deal bring to these countries that actually signed with the Israeli regime, I will tell you that it brings absolutely nothing except the fast pace of their demise. Because as I told you, the number of UAE activists was usually do not open their mouths because of the dictatorship in the UAE, because they would get arrested over anything at any time. They stood firm along with the Bahrainis as well. But basically 80% of the Bahrainis now, according to the latest surveys, are against this new peace deal signed with the Israeli regime. But we have to remember that it comes at a very important time for Donald Trump, who was the godfather, if you will, of this signature. In a couple of weeks now, Donald Trump will go to presidential elections. And trust me that this move that he did will be celebrated by the evangelicals in the US to a point that he is now for sure going to be reelected for a second time.